Hey guys, it's Dr. Minardi here, bringing you all things STEM. From my journey to yours, we are on an adventure together. Today, we have the incredible fortune of speaking to someone who has led just such an interesting and non-linear life in STEM so far. So let's welcome to the stage Dr. Rosas Vargas. Hey, Dr. Rosas Vargas, how are you?
Hello, Dr. Minardi. How are you?
I'm doing well. So, Dr. Daisy Rosas Vargas identifies as a first generation indigenous Mexica and Latin born in what is called the United States. She is a chemist, science communicator, and educator who enjoys sharing the wonders of chemistry and science with the future generation. She used her voice to represent and advocate for the underrepresented students in the college classroom as a former professor at a small liberal arts college. Her current focus since making a career change is making science accessible and relatable through projects like Chemist in the Kitchen with the National Academy of Sciences, Drawing with Dr. Daisy with the Museum of the Earth in Ithaca, New York, and Real Chem with Arizona State University and Carnegie Mellon University. Daisy wants to open doors to those behind her so that their career journey is more attainable and welcoming. And can't we all just agree on doing that? So again, welcome, Dr. Rosas Vargas. It is such a pleasure to have you. And, the first question that we always ask our guests are, we can obviously read your bio, learn a lot about you. You're highly educated, but tell us a little bit beyond the bio.
Beyond the bio, I guess everybody's like, oh, you're a chemist, this and that, everything. Oh, you must just only like chemistry. I think that's misleading. I want to call myself like a chemist with an interest in like all sciences. Because like I own two telescopes, like a refractor and a reflector telescope because I like astronomy. I enjoy looking for fossils. So I actually have my own little mini collection of fossils that I had to carefully like move when I moved from the East Coast to the West Coast. Um, and what else? Oh, I have a dog that I like to say has a master's in dog science because he was with me for a good like 3 years of my PhD. So I'm like, well, he basically earned a degree like while I was earning one because he had to listen to me to like talk and practice all my talks. Yeah.
That's precious. But I think that's so applicable because we've had numerous people on this podcast who just have a variety of different interests, and it's some of them are in line with their career or their area of study, and some of them are not. But I think it's all kind of relatable too. I adopted two little bunny rabbits my second year of my PhD, and they no, they didn't have degrees. Let's just be real, but they were cute and fluffy, and that's all I needed during my
Yeah.
PhD. So tell us a little bit about your sort of, why chemistry? Why did you go down that route of chemistry? A little bit about your background as well.
Yeah. So I, as a small kid, wanted to be a vet. That, I've always loved animals. That's why I have a dog. And I later found out that, like, animals like to be a vet, you need to know like human biology and you had to like cut things open. And I was like, I don't know if I want to do that. And don't like the sight of, I just don't like the cutting and the blood part. Like gushy, organy, fleshy things. Do not like that. Um, but then it took a while. So that was like when I was like 5. But I ended up getting this scholarship to go to a small STEM camp nearby in 7th grade. And the first class, one of the classes that I really enjoyed was called mystery powders. So you're given an unknown powder and you're supposed to do all these different tests to determine what that powder is that you have. And I liked the idea of trying to solve a problem or trying to solve an unknown. And I thought this was interesting. Like, okay, this was like forensic science. And this was like before I started watching CSI. I'm like, okay, maybe I can watch some CSI. um, and that's kind of how it started. It just kind of kept this like little inkling in the back of my head. And actually, when I went to college, I went in as a chemistry major. And I was like, I'm going to do forensics. And to do forensics, like your specialty is supposed to be analytical chemistry. And I took my first course in that, like my second year, and something just wasn't clicking. And I'm like, okay, like I should not be discouraged to pursue chemistry. But at the same time, I was taking another course in chemistry called organic chemistry. And that kind of really captured my interest. There's a lot of solving these problems by noticing these patterns you see before. And there were these classes where we were given an unknown substance out of like a list of 500. Like it was pre-approved by the professor. And he's like, I've only really chosen like the ones that we can buy that are available, but here's a list of just 500 chemical compounds. Can you determine what it is based on tests that you run, based on analytical data, using analytical instruments to determine if there are any little specific parts in that molecule that just happen to be activated under a certain type of instrument. We got to do like these tests to see like, is it an oil? Is it a solid? Figuring out like what's the melting point or boiling point of it. And that was really fascinating. And that stuck with me. So I kept taking all these organic courses in college, and ended up like, okay, I'm going to do organic chemistry, but what can I do with it? And I didn't know what to do with it until about like 6 weeks before I had to graduate. All my other friends had figured out what they wanted to do. And I was like, is this normal? Is this not normal? But I had this really good interaction with my professor. We had just given a presentation on an reaction that we were not familiar with, that we were supposed to teach the class in about 10 to 15 minutes. So, like a little mini lecture. And he came up after me. He came up to me after I had given that presentation and said, have you ever thought about teaching? He's like, you have this good voice and way to communicate, this really abstract and different reaction that you didn't learn as an undergrad. That's more like something that you learn like in graduate school, to like your classmates. And he's like, you should think about doing a PhD. And that kind of started that little inkling of like, oh, maybe I can get a higher degree and find a career in teaching.
No, it's interesting because there's whenever we have guests on, it's always kind of like, okay, well, what was the scenario by which you made a determination to like where you chose your career path, right? And it's either random. So there's two things. It's either random, like a random event or something, or a person has impacted you in a way of saying like, well, given these sort of gifts that you have and attributes, maybe you should consider this. So I love that because we need a lot of, especially Orgo. Orgo is just really, really challenging to not only harness, but to also convey to others. And so having a gift at actually conveying it to others is awesome. It's interesting for me that you said no analytical, and I'm like, oh, but that was my whole thing. I loved instrumentation.
I used instruments.
But I used to teach Orgo. I did teach Orgo for a little bit.
Mhm.
I loved it, especially the lab. The lab was the best. Okay, so you had this sort of epiphany, right, that you wanted to teach.
Yeah.
So then what? What happened next?
So, because it was only 6 weeks after before graduating, I had to make this quick pivot of I didn't have any research under my belt, which sometimes like is like considered a must have when you want to go to like graduate school. And I was like, well, I don't have this because most professors don't want you to do research for them for like a very limited amount of time because they, want to invest in you and don't want you to just learn something and then have to leave without really contributing to any of their research. So I ended up finding a internship in a pharmaceutical company in San Diego called Novartis. And I was there for almost a year where I kind of learned more thorough aspects about organic chemistry and like the applications for it. Um, and this also kind of backed up the idea that I did not want to be a bench chemist in the long run. Like, it was really cool. I liked learning like all the things that go into like making and discovering a new pharmaceutical drug to treat something. That was pretty amazing. But I still enjoyed interacting and trying to explain something to someone else. And eventually um, I applied to graduate school, went to graduate school at Indiana University in Bloomington. I was there for 5 years. Ended up having I was able to go directly into teaching after I graduated. But during that time in graduate school, I was also exploring something else that captured my interest. Science outreach, or I feel like that's the term that we used to use and we now use as just science engagement, or science communication and education. And I did this internship. I told my PhD advisor, I'm not going to be in lab in the mornings 2 days a week. No, yeah, 2 days a week, but I'll be back for the rest of the day. But I'm going to do this internship at the local museum. He's like, okay, that's fine. As long as you can do your research, he's like, you can do whatever you want. I'm like, okay, thanks. It was an early childhood education internship. So I got to work with the education director at the museum to make small programming and like a curriculum for infants to toddlers. And she really focused on STEM. So how can we show STEM, especially those like really more abstract topics like physics, like gravity, or force, or even chemical reactions to young children? How can they somehow capture it with their senses that they currently are developing? Because at a certain age, they're really good at just like visually looking at things or touching things. So trying to come up with ways to explain and interact with science like at your fingertips was really cool. And I kind of took that with me after I left graduate school. And I kept actually doing it at when I was a professor afterwards, and doing a lot of like science engagements around the community. And after I left being a professor, I thought like, hey, I'm really good at this. I should explore this more. And through a lot of various opportunistic situations, I've been able to communicate science visually through like small talks or like small videos. And that has been incredibly rewarding.
I love that on so many levels. And I think, one, how did you convince your PI to actually allow you to not be in lab for 2 mornings? My goodness, I could. Yeah, anyway, yes, grad school was an interesting time, I think, for many, if not all. So there's that. So awesome. I it's interesting that you talk about science outreach and engagement. That's one of our missions here at STEM From. And it's not only from the fact of, God, I was just on a call with someone around, thinking through curriculums and thinking through what are those general principles that are used. We were talking about geometry and like the basic theories and principles in geometry, and then what do you actually use on a daily basis? And yes, you use them greatly on a daily basis. They might be taught to you in a very rigid format that is inapplicable to actual like daily life. But then if you actually think about it, you use them on a daily basis.
Yep.
And so being able to not only convey them scientifically, but to also then convey them in an application-based arena is huge.
Yep.
So you got your PhD in organic chemistry. What was, and what, so, but hang on, let me back up. So you were at Novartis for an internship and you were thinking about, okay, bench science isn't necessarily for me. What was it that was a detractor for you?
Maybe it was the specific project that I was on, and because it was a unique scenario where most of the time, and I'm saying most of the time in quotes because again, it could happen more often now. I don't know, since I've been away from that space for almost like 10 years. But the biology part of this project was behind the chemistry. So we didn't know a lot of biology, and the chemistry was like, oh, we're getting all these like interesting hits and like this is really cool, but we don't know where to go from here because the bio hasn't caught up, like just in terms of like research, the bio hasn't caught up, which is semi rare. And the thought that they had proposed, like, hey, maybe we're going to table this project for 10 years until maybe the bio can catch up to the chemistry. So I have no idea, it's been 10 years, if they have followed up through with it. So if in another 10 years I see this drug on the market and I'm like, oh, that sounds like the project that I worked on, then I'd be like, okay, they did wait all this time. But it was, I don't know, just being indoors. That was the other thing. I was just like at a bench. I wasn't near any windows. I had a really good like lab mate who would sometimes sing opera in the mornings. It was adorable. While I was like doing something. But there was just something about it where I'm like, I'm not finding the gratification like in the near future or seeing the impact soon enough, where with teaching it can take a while to see the impact that you're making, but I would say it's a bit more faster than with like doing like med chem related research. Same with like science communication and education. Sometimes you see this like little light bulb turn on in a child's like actions or the way they're expressing themselves, or with students in the classroom, or while they're trying to run an experiment in the lab. I was like, I would rather teach someone like these little tiny tricks that I have learned for them to have a slightly easier experience than I did when I was like in their shoes.
I appreciate that answer, and I agree with that answer, at least from my personal experience as well. I think the reason I asked you that question is that choosing a career path, especially one like that, is you have to be highly introspective to yourself to understand, would I be able to survive on a daily basis?
Mm-hmm.
I am incredibly introverted, but I like being around people and I love collaborating. And it's so interesting that you were talking about your project, because that is what was a huge detractor for research for me, because I felt like I was one little piece to a very large puzzle, but I didn't have access to resources that could then create that sort of holistic view on that larger puzzle. And so I was highly envious of labs that had biostatisticians, who had cell regulators, who knew how to grow cells, who could do protein management, and then who had people to focus on the instrumentation. That would be essentially me. And so you would be part of a really large lab that had all the keys to the kingdom to understand the entire puzzle. But if you didn't have access to resources like that, then it was really, really hard to put it into perspective. I think for you saying about the light bulb moment and about kids going, oh, that's why. It's like, yes, okay, yes. Those were the quintessential moments of teaching. I love that. So then you got into teaching, right? And you transitioned directly from, which is a huge move, from, grad school to then teaching. So tell us a little bit about that.
So I kind of told my PhD advisor that I wanted to teach. So like we strategically found opportunities for me to do teaching, as well as doing the research that I had to do to graduate. So that kind of helped a little bit on, how to develop my own teaching style, how I would like to explain things. And I would use that when I was teaching at the undergraduate level. So I primarily taught undergraduate, since it was a primarily undergraduate institution. And we had small class sizes, which I enjoyed because you really get to know your students. You have more time to help them individually. And you always hope that they would be able to ask you for help. Compared to maybe if someone had gone to a large public university like I did, where it was a bit harder to ask for help if you needed it. And you may have encountered like these barriers, for example, like being shy, which I am also very introverted. But again, I like being around people for certain amounts of time. And I thought like, this would be a great opportunity to really like make an impact on these students, whether it is that they want to pursue chemistry or if they want to pursue something else, but they need that chemistry background, because you'd be surprised, something that is very different, let's say like physical therapy, they are expected to know basic chemical principles that happen in the body, because they have to, know about certain movements, and they may have to deal with athletes, and athletes get sore all the time. And as I would explain to them, there is this buildup of a certain chemical in your muscles that occurs if you do not stretch after you, are doing whatever movement or whatever sport. And they were like, oh, that's why we feel sore. This is like the chemical that's responsible for that soreness. Because some of those students were student athletes. So it kind of like they made this connection. And so I would always try to do that with teaching, try to have them make a connection to something that maybe they have experienced, or something that is related to their possible future career, just to make it a bit more interesting. And that's harder to do, I think, if you have like a class of 300 students, where you probably have a lot more variety in majors. So it's hard to connect with those students. You're able to connect probably with a handful of them, or maybe like half of them, but to be able to know some of the interests that your students have just by interacting with them, talking with them, I think is like it's really great to have that type of connection.
I totally agree. I think the interesting thing is that it also brings a humanity back to it, of saying like, these are not just students. They're not just here to be taught the curriculum, but you also are a leader, you're a teacher, you're there for professional development as well, counseling. I mean, there was many, many times where I was in, a TA, and, I had to take off my general chemistry TA hat and put on my life coach hat and be like,
Yeah.
maybe this is not where you should be. Let's think about what you like to do. And that's okay, because that's all they're looking for. They're looking for some guidance.
Yeah, that's one of the things that was different from like teaching at an undergrad institution, or for like graduate school. You did have to put on these various hats, being a mentor hat, or if you had a student coming something with something completely outside of a class you were teaching, something a bit more personal, especially with like things that went on in the world, like, 4 years ago. Um, they it it was a very different perspective because no one prepares you for this. So you sometimes have to rely on your own experiences to really connect with the students. And as a person of color, I was able to make some of those connections with them. And they're like, thank you for, listening to me, and or thank you for really listening to me and not just like nodding and acknowledge, but like acknowledging that, this is something that I'm experiencing, that it's an issue, or that that they haven't been able to find that type of connection with maybe like some other professors because there's some type of barrier. um and to get across to them, I think was, again, it was really rewarding. And you said the other hat, the coach hat, talking like, hey, maybe like it seems like you're really interested in this like other thing, maybe you should like look into that, because maybe some students come in being like, I'm going to be x because my parents do x, and I want to follow in their footsteps. But at the end of the day, it's like, well, you're going to have to live with this big choice, just like, I went through. Um, and it's like, can you find something in that choice that will eventually, fulfill your, I would say, like, self actualization? I'm bringing in some like psychology terms. um, and you're going to be a lot more happier in whatever role you're going to be in if you hopefully encounter a path that is more aligned to your personal interests.
Precisely. You worded it so much better than I did. That is precisely what I felt like I was doing most time during TA sessions. So you taught for a while, and then now you're not, and you're focusing on science engagement. So tell us a little bit about that transition. What spurred it, why, and what do you love doing now?
So during various, there were a couple of incidences that occurred at the institution that I was, and where I'm like, okay, this doesn't align with my values and beliefs. And I was like, I need to do something that aligns with my values, beliefs, um, it like that fall into this umbrella of, I want to open doors for other people. I don't want to I don't want to have any like doors be hard to access to. Um, and I made this very hard decision to leave teaching. And when I told a couple of the students, they were sad because I would not be able to see them graduate. I was able to see, I would say, my first class that I saw from freshmen to seniors graduate. But I wasn't able to see that second class graduate. Was a little bit sad. But when I had told them the reasoning, they're like, that's actually brave. They're like, I admire that you are making this choice for yourself. Um, so even they were able to understand this very complex situation of like self-actualization, and seeing like, oh, someone can pivot careers even though they've already started doing something. Yes, like it is not easy. There are, certain privileges that allow someone to be able to maybe make those choices that maybe other people cannot. um but it should not be something that is frowned upon or um, thought of as what do I want to say? Like uh, not being, good enough to do the previous job that one had left to do another job. Um, and like I said, it was hard, but I was like, maybe in a year or two from now, I will see that this was the best choice for me. And it's been a year, and it was definitely the best choice for me. um, so yeah, the first couple months you're like, oh my gosh, what do I do now? Because you, whether it's that you stay in a certain place or you move. So like I had moved back across the country, back to my hometown, and it's different now that I'm in like my 30s compared to like when I left it when I was in like my late teens, early 20s. Like your perspective of the world is different. You have to relearn everything. Um Relearn, like, I don't know, I would say like almost the culture too, because it's a culture that you grew up with, and maybe you went away and experienced something else, but you come back to this culture which is still there, but maybe it has also changed in a different way where like, oh, this is actually really cool. And so there's that. But now, like, I get to do all these really exciting things, like try to find different ways to communicate science to children, to like teenagers, college students, and even like adults. So it touches upon those various different experiences I've had in the past that I'm able to apply them to my current situation. And it has been really good. I what is it? I like to tell people that there's nothing wrong with doing a career change. Um, that we should talk about it more. And it's interesting because lately on like whether it's like social media or any type of like platform, professional platform, it seems that people are talking about it more than let's say 4 years ago. And I always wonder, like, hey, does the pandemic have to do anything with this? Or did we kind of see the shift of like, oh, it is, I don't want to say it's more acceptable, but society is more acceptable towards it. Um, and I think that's something that like we should keep talking about. And I think that people should also look into something like science communication and education, because something that I realized is that scientists can talk to other scientists, but they sometimes have this barrier, this made up barrier where it's hard for them to tell the general public, this is why I'm researching what I'm researching, and this is why I need money, or this is why I just spent, 12 years so I can be a full professor. Like it's something that isn't taught to you well as you are going through like graduate school, but I think it's something that we should spend more time on, because you never know who you may meet and a certain opportunity arises, and being able to communicate clearly and in a very simplified manner these complex um, problems and scenarios of science, and so you can make that connection with people. um, and then even more of there what is it more people I guess what do I want to say, certain communities maybe don't know why so much money is being sent from the government to you know schools and foundations like the NSF or the NIH, because there's no one telling them like, oh, to find um a cure or um a way to treat something, this needs to go through this entire process. And that unfortunately like needs money and needs people with so many backgrounds to come together to solve a problem. And I think that's like a big gap, especially like if I were to like tell my cousins that like live in Mexico, I would one first have to translate it in my head to Spanish and then try to communicate that and be like, okay, this is what I studied. This is why chemistry matters. This is why we need more chemists. Because we need to be able to communicate to our own culture the importance of why we do things.
That's spot on. I think it's disheartening in the fact that I don't think you're alone in what you have experienced during your teaching years. I can commiserate on many levels around what you were talking about. That's partially why I left academia and why I left, hardcore sciences as well. And it's a reality. It's a reality. But that doesn't mean that there's not something else out there that you can't translate all of your skills to then apply to. You're putting your passions to science engagement for women in STEM, and there's a variety of different ways that you can contribute to society without actually being at a laptop bench, and doing that hardcore research stuff. There's a variety of different things out there, and you have to do some self-realization and actualization of, what do you want? What do you find fulfilling in your career? And, when you go home at the end of the day, whether it's proverbially at home because you work at home, or if you literally go home, it's like, okay, no, I'm happy with what I'm doing. And I'm pleased with myself in that I know that I am doing what I want to be doing and not what someone else is wanting to do. And that is fulfilling, I think, in that way. So we are nearing the end of our time. And I do want to, we've talked a lot about your career and a lot of what you've done. And it's, you've had just such an amazing, I think, path, and you're on such an amazing path, frankly, to really, to drive lots of different work forward. I'd be curious that, given sort of all of your circuitous routes, if you were to talk back to little Daisy, 10, 15 years ago, what would you tell her?
I would tell her that she has to trust herself in making her choices. And that, no one else should be making the choices for her or forcing her to be in situations where she's not valued or heard. But I would probably, I would not regret the choices that I've done to get to where I am. So I would tell, like, just keep doing what you're doing. You have a good instinct. And I would say just be more confident. That's what I would tell. I feel like I definitely lacked confidence up until I ended up getting my PhD. Then, like, I turned on a little, like, on and off switch and was like very much more outspoken about certain things, like, no, this is not okay, or something should be done about this situation. And I would just tell little Daisy to be more confident.
I love that. Confidence is key. I love that. And kind of go with your gut, for lack of better way of
Yeah.
saying it, I think. I think your gut knows, and what doesn't sit well with you.
Yep.
And so you take that into consideration, and to a great deal of consideration, when you're going, okay, I'm seeing some red flags here. Let's assess. So with that, Dr. Rosas Vargas, this has been such a great conversation. I valued it. I value you. You're making such a difference. And this has just been great. So thank you for joining me and us on this podcast.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And I'm glad, hopefully, this can give a little bit of confidence boost to anyone else that's listening to this and needs that just a little bit in their day.
There you go. I love that. All right. Bye, everyone. At STEMFrom, we are working towards making all STEM careers achievable regardless of your identity, background, or even access to resources. Here at STEMFrom, we will introduce you to all things STEM, whether they be careers, research, tips and tricks, and even inspiration. Thanks all for watching and learning with us today, and don't forget to ask yourselves, where do you want your journey to stem from? Bye, everyone.